My name is Sloan Mercer. I'm 35 years old, and for 11 years I was the financial floor beneath my younger brother's life. He walked on me every single day without looking down. Last April, Declan stood at the rehearsal dinner of his own wedding in a restored event hall in Millhaven, Ohio, a venue my $18,000 contribution had helped make possible, and gave a toast about building his life from nothing. He talked about grit. He talked about resilience. He talked about how a man with a dream and a willingness to fail will always find his way. 200 people raised their glasses. His new father-in-law, Patrick Brannon, the founder of a regional construction empire with his name on 3 buildings downtown, nodded like he was watching his own biography performed on stage. My mother wiped her eyes. My father put his hand on her back. I was sitting at a table 7 feet from the microphone, holding a glass of sparkling water, and I did not make a single sound. 3 days after the wedding, Declan called me from his honeymoon to ask for $60,000. That was the phone call that ended 11 years and $247,000 of silence. Welcome to Beyond the Headlights, the channel for the people who finally turn on the high beams and see exactly what's been on the road in front of them. If you have ever funded someone else's story while they told it without you in it, this one is for you. Drop a comment and tell me how long you've been the floor. And subscribe, because what happened after I picked up that phone is going to take every minute of this story to tell you properly. Before I tell you about the $247,000, I need to tell you who I was, because it explains everything about how the number got that high. I grew up in Millhaven, the kind of mid-sized Ohio city where everybody's parents went to the same high school and the same 3 restaurants have been open since 1987. My father, Gene Mercer, ran a small civil engineering firm out of an office above a dry cleaner. My mother, Carol, taught 4th grade for 28 years. We were solidly, quietly comfortable. Not wealthy. Comfortable. There's a difference, and I understood it early. I was the older one by 3 years. The one who finished her homework at the kitchen table before dinner. The one who worked at the public library through high school for $12 an hour and saved most of it. I went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship and paid the rest myself by living in a studio with 2 roommates and eating a lot of eggs. I graduated with a degree in architecture, moved to Columbus, joined a firm, and worked my way into project management by 27. By 30, I was leading commercial builds worth 8 figures. Numbers have always made sense to me. I can look at a budget the way some people read a novel. I see the plot, I see where it's headed, I see the chapter where it falls apart. This skill is the only reason I was able to do what I eventually did. But it's also the reason I could maintain the lie for so long. I tracked everything. I kept records. And because I kept records, I could always tell myself it was manageable, that the loans were loans, that the pattern wasn't a pattern. Declan was the other kind of person. He had charmed the way some people have a natural athletic ability, effortless, visible, slightly unfair to everyone around him. He was funny and magnetic and completely comfortable walking into a room full of strangers and walking out with 3 new friends and a business idea. He just couldn't hold a business idea long enough to make it into anything solid. He burned brightly and briefly, over and over, and every time the flame went out, I was the one who quietly swept up the ash. I want to be honest about why I did it, because the easy explanation, that I was a pushover, that I couldn't say no, is not quite right. I did it because I loved him, genuinely and without condition, the way you love a person you watched grow up. I did it because he always came to me and not our parents, and there was something in that I mistook for trust. And I did it because somewhere in my early 20s I had decided that being useful to the people I loved was the closest thing to being safe. If I was the solution, I could never be the problem. That logic will run you $247,000 before you notice what it's cost. The first time was 2014. Declan was 22, freshly out of a 2-year business program he had half finished, and he'd found an apartment in Clintonville he was certain would change his life. He needed $4,500 for the deposit and first month's rent. He'd already told his landlord it was handled. He called me on a Tuesday night, his voice at the specific pitch it used when he needed something, half apology, half certainty that I would come through. It's temporary, Sloan. 6 weeks, tops. I've got a sales job starting and the first commission covers it twice over. I sent the money that night. The sales job lasted 4 months. He paid me back $1,200 of the $4,500 and then went quiet on the rest for long enough that asking felt unkind. I let it go. I told myself $3,300 wasn't a number worth a difficult conversation. That was the first lesson I failed to learn. There were smaller things after that. A car repair here, a utility shutoff there, a security deposit on the next apartment when the one in Clintonville didn't work out. Each one was under $2,000. Each one arrived with a specific story and a specific repayment date and a specific certainty that things were about to turn around. And I sent the money each time with a kind of practiced quietness. I didn't discuss it with my parents, didn't mention it to mutual friends, didn't make it a thing. Declan had asked me not to. He was proud, he said. He didn't want them to worry. I understood that. I had spent my whole life managing my own problems before they became anyone else's. The first number that should have stopped me was $23,000. That was what the restaurant cost. He was 26 when he opened it, a fast casual taco concept in a strip mall near Ohio State. He'd done the research, he said. He'd talked to investors, he said. He just needed a partner for the initial equipment lease and the first 3 months of payroll while the revenue caught up. I was 29 at that point, 2 years into leading projects at my firm, making real money for the first time in my life. And I thought, this is what having money means. This is what you do with it. You help the people you love take their shot. I sent the $23,000 in 2 transfers over 8 weeks. The restaurant lasted 14 months. When it closed, Declan owed $61,000 to various creditors, including $23,000 to me. He called on a Sunday afternoon, voice completely flat, and said it was over. He said he was sorry. He said he was going to figure out a plan to pay everything back. I told him the plan could wait and asked if he was okay. That's the detail that still catches in my throat when I think about it. He had just lost $61,000, much of it mine, and I asked if he was okay. I'm telling you that because I want you to understand what I was doing. I wasn't being naive. I was being a person who had decided that his well-being was more important than my money. That sounds generous until you run the numbers far enough out. By the time Declan turned 30, I had lent or given him, depending on how honest I was being with myself in any given moment, $112,000. I had never told a single person. Not my parents, not my closest friends, not the therapist I saw briefly in 2018 for work-related stress. The money lived in my spreadsheet and nowhere else. I labeled the rows with dates and amounts and the brief note Declan had given me each time. Restaurant deposit. Car loan payoff. Business consultant fees. Emergency rent. Medical bill, that one I remember clearly because I called him 3 times to ask which doctor and he changed the story slightly each time before I stopped asking. I didn't add up the column often. When I did, I closed the spreadsheet quickly and told myself it was the cost of having a brother. The second business was a home renovation and remodeling company. Declan had spent a year working for a contractor and convinced himself he understood the industry. He was partnered with a friend named Tyler who I never met and who, from what I could gather, contributed primarily enthusiasm. They needed startup capital, insurance bonds, and equipment. Declan asked me for $40,000 over the course of 6 months, in amounts between $6,000 and $12,000, always framed as the last piece they needed before the cash flow would sustain itself. I sent it. The company lasted 2.5 years, which was actually the longest anything of Declan's had survived. When it dissolved, Tyler disappeared with the last piece of equipment and left Declan holding a lease on a storage unit and a tax liability I helped him resolve for $18,000. That resolution cost brought my total, as of the fall of 2022, to $187,000. I remember the exact moment I typed that number into the spreadsheet and looked at it. I was sitting at my kitchen island in Columbus on a Wednesday night, a glass of wine to my left, my laptop open in front of me, and I stared at $187,000 until it stopped looking like a number and started looking like a portrait of 11 years of my own choices. I did not cry. I closed the laptop and refilled the wine and went to bed and got up the next morning and went to work, because that is what I do. What I did not do was call Declan and say, "Enough." That is the part I have to own. I had 11 years of opportunities to say that word, and I chose, every single time, to say something else instead. He met Vivienne Brannon at a fundraiser in Millhaven in the spring of 2023. She was 29, the younger daughter of Patrick Brannon, the kind of woman who had grown up with the confidence that comes from knowing the floor will always be there. She was warm and sharp, and she adored Declan in a way that was immediate and obvious. They were engaged by November. I learned about the engagement from my mother, who called me on a Sunday with her voice at a frequency I recognized as the highest grade happiness she had. "Isn't it wonderful?" she kept saying. "The Brannons. They're such a lovely family. Declan has really landed somewhere wonderful, hasn't he?" I said yes, because he had, and because I meant it. Whatever complications existed between Declan and me, I wanted him to be happy. I want you to understand that clearly, because what I did later was not about wanting him to fail. It was about stopping myself from funding a version of him that was destroying my ability to trust my own judgment. 2 weeks after the engagement, Declan called. "I need a favor, Sloane, just one more. The Brannons want to do a big engagement party. Vivienne's mother has her heart set on this venue downtown." Declan's voice had the quality of a man who was slightly ashamed but not ashamed enough to stop asking. "I need to cover my half of the deposit while I get my business finances sorted. It's $9,000, $3 months, tops. Patrick is going to bring me into one of his projects, and it's going to change everything. This is the last time, I promise." He had said that sentence before. I had counted. This was the 7th time he had said the words "last time." I sent the $9,000. Total, $196,000. By the wedding in April 2024, I had sent 3 more transfers. A $12,000 contribution to the wedding costs that Declan said he would pay back out of his first paycheck from the Brannon project. A $21,000 wire to a debt collector Declan had not told me about until the collector called his future father-in-law's office number by mistake. And $18,000 toward the rehearsal dinner venue deposit, framed as a wedding gift to the couple. Because the alternative was Declan asking Vivienne's family to cover it, and the question of why he couldn't cover his own rehearsal dinner would have been one he couldn't answer without telling truths he wasn't prepared to tell. Total, as of the morning of Declan's wedding, $247,000. I drove to Millhaven on a Thursday. I pressed my dress, checked into a hotel, and sat in the 4th row at St. Catherine's Church and watched my brother marry a woman he loved in a ceremony that was beautiful and genuine and cost him, personally, almost nothing. The rehearsal dinner speech was the thing that changed the temperature in me. I want to be accurate about this because I have thought about it a great deal in the months since. I wasn't surprised that he didn't thank me. I had always understood, somewhere beneath the spreadsheet, that my role was invisible by design. Declan had built a version of himself for the Brannon family, a self-made entrepreneur with a series of hard-won lessons and a bright future, and that version had no room for a sister who had been wiring him money since he was 22. Acknowledging me would have required explaining me, so he didn't. What changed something in me was the specificity of the lie. He talked about scraping together his own capital. He talked about learning from failure without anyone to catch him. He talked about coming to Patrick Brannon's table as a man who had built himself out of nothing and was ready to build something real. Patrick nodded at that part. Actually nodded, slowly, like a man who was confirming a decision he had already made. I looked at my mother across the table. She was smiling. She knew. She had known for years, in the way parents know things they choose not to examine too closely, that money moved from my account to Declan's. She had never asked the amount. She had never asked me how it felt. She had, on 2 separate occasions, thanked me for being such a supportive sister, in the breezy way you thank someone for bringing a nice bottle of wine to dinner. I picked up my water glass, and I held it in both hands, and I sat with $247,000, while my brother told 200 people he had built himself from nothing. And I decided, in that moment, that I was done being nothing. The phone call came on a Tuesday. They were in Aruba. I could hear something tropical in the background, a fan, maybe, or music from a nearby pool. "Sloan, hey, how are you?" He had the loosened voice of a man who had been on a honeymoon for 3 days and was feeling expansive. "I love it here. Vive's family rented this place. It's unbelievable." He asked about my drive home. He asked whether I'd had fun at the wedding. The small talk lasted perhaps 4 minutes, which was longer than usual, and I understood from the length of it that the ask was larger than usual. Then, so listen. Patrick has this project, a mixed-use development in Westerville, retail on the ground floor, residential above. He's bringing me in as a project coordinator, which is huge. But he wants his people to have skin in the game. He's asking his partners to invest alongside him. A pause. In that pause, I heard 11 years. "I need to put in $60,000 to get the seat at the table, Sloan. I know the timing isn't ideal, but this is the one. This is the thing everything has been building toward. If I don't have it in 2 weeks, Patrick gives the spot to someone else." I sat in my kitchen in Columbus. Outside, it was raining. I had my laptop open and my spreadsheet visible, and the total sat at the top of the column the way it always did. $247,000. I want to tell you about the clarity of that moment because it's important. It wasn't rage. I have heard many people describe the moment they finally said no to someone who had used them, and they often describe it as explosive, as a dam breaking, as something loud. Mine was the opposite. It was like a room going quiet when the last guest leaves. Simple, clear, finished. I told him I needed to think about it. He said, of course, no rush, take a few days. I thanked him and hung up and opened a new tab on my laptop and searched for a family law and civil litigation attorney in Columbus, because I am an architect. I think in structures, and the structure I had been inside for 11 years was not a family. It was a financial arrangement, and only one of us had known the terms. I want to stop here for one moment and speak directly to anyone who's been in the spreadsheet with me. If you have been sending money on faith, if you have a column of transfers that you tell yourself are temporary, if you have ever closed a banking app quickly because the total felt like a door you weren't ready to walk through, open it. Tonight, just one statement. Read it the way you would read someone else's file, not with the tenderness of someone who loves the borrower, with the clarity of someone who is owed an accounting. Because here is what I found when I finally read mine like a stranger. The story it told was not about a generous sister. It was about a woman who had financed another person's self-image for 11 years and received, in return, the privilege of watching that self-image perform for an audience that didn't know she existed. Subscribe now, because the next part is where the folder comes out, and not mine. I met with the attorney, a woman named Patricia Acaffer, on a Thursday morning. She had the quality I have come to associate with excellent professionals in any field. She listened until I was completely finished before she said a single word. I brought printed bank statements. I brought the spreadsheet. I brought 11 years of text messages in which Declan acknowledged the amounts and used the word loan. She read everything without expression. Then she looked up. "You have a legally recoverable debt here. Not all of it, but a substantial portion. The text acknowledgments create an implied loan agreement under Ohio law." She set the papers down. "The harder question isn't can you pursue this. The harder question is what outcome you want from pursuing it." I told her I didn't want to pursue it in court. Not yet. I wanted to send a formal demand letter. I wanted Declan to know, in language he could not dismiss or reframe or charm his way around, that the $247,000 existed and was documented and was no longer going to be a secret he managed on my behalf. She drafted it in 4 days. It was 2 pages. It itemized every transfer with dates and amounts and Declan's written acknowledgments. It stated clearly that I was not authorizing any further loans or gifts. It requested a repayment conversation within 30 days. I approved it on a Monday. It was served to Declan on Wednesday. He called Thursday morning, before I had finished my first cup of coffee. His voice was not the voice from the honeymoon. It was tight, clipped, operating at the specific register of a person who has been told something they cannot argue with and is trying very hard to locate an angle. "What is this, Sloan? What are you doing?" I told him it was a formal accounting of money I had lent him over 11 years. $247,000. He said the number slowly, like he was reading it off a wall across a very large room. "You're actually going to do this?" I told him I had been doing it for 11 years. The only thing that was new was that it was written down somewhere other than my spreadsheet. A silence. Then, "Do you know what this will do to me with Patrick? If he finds out that I have this kind of debt to my sister, the Westerville deal disappears." I told him that the Westerville deal was not my concern. He shifted. "Sloan, I'm going to pay it back. I've always been going to pay it back. This letter makes it look like," he stopped, "like I took advantage of you." I waited. "I need you to trust me. This moment, this project, this is where everything changes. I'm asking you to trust me one more time." "I have trusted you for 11 years, Declan." I told him that in the same voice I used to tell a client that the budget has been exceeded. Calm, factual, irrecoverable. I don't have any more trust to lend. I do have documentation. He hung up. When Declan goes quiet, my mother fills the silence. She called 2 hours later, her voice doing the particular thing it does when she's been briefed by him and is performing concern she didn't arrive at herself. "Sloan, honey, I just want to understand what's happening. This letter, a lawyer." I told her what was happening. I gave her the same number, $247,000, $11 years, every transfer. A silence on her end that told me this was not a number she had known, even approximately. She recalibrated quickly the way people do when they are more committed to a narrative than to the truth. "Sloan, you know how Declan is. He's been trying. He's in a good place now, a really good place, and if this comes out, if Patrick finds out." I told her Patrick finding out was not my responsibility. "But the family," she said, and she meant it genuinely, in the specific way that mothers who have spent a lifetime managing appearances mean it. "Think about what this does to the family." I thought about 200 people in a banquet hall clapping for a man who told them he built himself from nothing. I thought about $247,000 in a spreadsheet that nobody in my family had ever asked to see. "Mom," I said, "where do you think his rent came from when he was 22? The silence that followed was not a thinking silence. It was a knowing silence. The silence of a person who has been choosing not to ask a question for a very long time. I told her I loved her and I ended the call. What happened next I did not plan and could not have engineered. My grandmother, Dorothy Mercer, is 78 years old. She lives 20 minutes from my parents in a house she has occupied since 1971, and she has spent those decades being the kind of woman who notices everything and comments on almost nothing. She is not warm in the demonstrative sense. She is warm in the structural sense. She shows up. She remembers. She pays attention. She is the person in our family who knows where all the money is, because she came from a generation that treated money as information and information, as something you held carefully until you needed it. She called me on a Friday evening, 11 days after the demand letter was served. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I'm only going to say it once, so I'd like you to listen completely before you respond." I agreed. She took a breath. "When Declan's restaurant failed in 2017, she said, he came to me, before he came to you. He told me he needed $15,000 for a debt he couldn't tell your parents about. I gave it to him from my savings. He paid back $4,000 of it." I sat very still. "When the construction company dissolved, he came to me again. $22,000. I had it, so I gave it. He paid back none of that one." She paused. "And last year, before the wedding, he came a third time. He said he needed $11,000 for a tax situation. I gave him $8,000 because that's what I had liquid." She was quiet for a moment. "I am telling you this because Patricia Acaffer is a very good attorney, and if you are building a full picture, it should be full." I asked her how she knew about Patricia Acaffer. "Your mother told your father. Your father told my son Michael. Michael called me." I have to pause here because there is something in what my grandmother did that I have thought about nearly every day since. She did not call me to rescue me. She called me to complete the picture. She is 78 years old, and she had been carrying $45,000 of her own money lent to her grandson. And rather than protect him, she picked up the phone and told me the truth, because she had watched me quietly for years. And she had understood, the way that generation of women understands things they were never taught in classrooms, exactly what was happening. The full number, between the two of us, was $292,000. The family dinner was my mother's idea, which meant it was actually Declan's idea delivered through my mother. It was framed as an opportunity to clear the air before things went any further. We'll all sit down, we'll talk it through, we'll find a solution as a family. The invitation came by text. Declan and Vivienne would be there. My parents. My grandmother had not been invited, a detail I noted and did not mention. I said I would come. I called my grandmother and told her what I knew about the dinner and asked her if she wanted to be there. She said she would think about it. She showed up 20 minutes before I did. When I walked into my parents' dining room, my grandmother was already seated at the head of the table with a glass of water and a manila envelope on the table in front of her. My mother looked like she had spent the last hour suppressing a feeling she didn't have a word for. Declan was at the other end, Vivienne beside him, and I could see from across the room that he had not told Vivienne the full picture. Her face had the careful attentiveness of a woman who has been told there is a misunderstanding and has not yet been told the actual story. My father sat in the middle, his hands folded, performing the neutrality of a man who has never in his life chosen a side between his wife and anyone else. I sat down. My grandmother looked at me. I gave her a small nod. Declan opened as Declan always opens, warmly, reasonably, with the voice and posture of someone moderating a conflict rather than sitting inside one. He said he understood I felt hurt. He said the letter had been a shock. He said he wanted to be clear that every dollar was always intended to be repaid, that the timeline had just been longer than either of us had hoped, and that given where he was now, with the Brannon partnership on the table, this was genuinely the worst possible moment for. My grandmother set her hand on the table. Flat, the sound was not loud. It didn't need to be. Everyone looked at her. She opened the manila envelope and slid out 3 pieces of paper. Handwritten ledgers, the kind she has kept since the 1980s, 1 column for what went out and 1 column for what came back. I lent you $45,000, she said. She said it to Declan with the directness of someone reading a utility bill. $15,000 in 2017, $22,000 in 2019, $8,000 last year. You paid back $4,000. Her eyes did not leave his face. I am 78. That money came from the account I set aside for my own medical care. The room did not breathe. Your sister, she continued, has lent you $247,000 since you were 22 years old. She kept the records because she is the kind of person who keeps records. She did not tell anyone because you asked her not to, and because she loved you enough to protect your dignity even while you were spending her savings. She put the papers back in the envelope and folded her hands. The total between the two of us is $292,000. You told a room full of people last week that you built yourself from nothing. She paused once. I was in that room. Declan's face had done something during this speech that I had never seen it do in 32 years. It had gone completely still, not the stillness of calm. The stillness of a person who has been caught in a truth so thorough that there is no angle left to work. Vivienne was looking at him. That was the moment I understood that she hadn't known, not the real numbers. She had married a man who had given her a version of himself, the same version he'd performed at the rehearsal dinner, and she was sitting in her in-laws' dining room watching that version dissolve. My mother had started to cry, not the kind of crying that reaches out, the private kind. My father was looking at the table. I did not make a speech. I had not planned one. I looked at Declan and I said the only thing that needed to be said, in the same even register I use for every conversation that matters. I'm not asking you to pay it all back tomorrow. I'm asking you to stop pretending it doesn't exist. Because I have the spreadsheet, Grandma has the ledger, and we are both done holding this for you. What happened after that takes longer to describe than it took to unfold. Declan did not storm out. He did something I had not seen from him since he was maybe 19 years old. He sat very still for a long time, and then he said, quietly, to the room and to no one in particular, "I didn't know it was that much." I believe him. I think that is the most frightening part. He had asked, each time, for an amount that felt manageable in the moment. He had never added the column. He had the luxury of not adding the column because I was the one keeping the records. He had built his self-made mythology sincerely, in the specific way you can believe a story you have carefully avoided fact-checking. Vivienne spoke to him for a long time that night after we left. I know this because she called me 2 weeks later. She was not angry at me. She was, if I had to name the quality in her voice, grieving. She said she had known there were some debts but not the scope of them. She said she had spoken with her father. She said the Westerville project conversation had been postponed indefinitely, while Declan and Patrick had a different conversation first. An honest one, she said, with a weight in the word that told me it was still happening. Patrick Brannan, from what Vivienne relayed, had taken the news with the measured quality of a man who is accustomed to people misrepresenting themselves in business and has a specific set of responses prepared. He did not collapse or rage. He asked questions. He wanted to understand the full liability. He is not, at last report, walking away from his daughter's marriage. He is walking away from the business partnership until the liability picture is clear. That is a fair response from a fair man. My grandmother and I have a standing call on Sunday evenings. She drinks her tea. I drink mine. She says she wishes she had done this years ago, and I tell her she did it exactly when she needed to, and we are both right. Here is the part where I tell you how it's settled, because I know that is what you are waiting for. The demand letter resulted in a payment plan, not a lawsuit. Declan and Vivienne are repaying $3,000 a month, which will take a long time and will require them to live more modestly than either of them had planned. My grandmother declined to formalize her portion as a debt. She said she had already written it off, and she prefers to spend her energy elsewhere. I think that is her choice to make, and I respect it completely. My mother and I are in the careful, deliberate work of rebuilding something honest. She told me, about a month after the dinner, that she had always known the money was flowing and had told herself it was between siblings and not her business to ask about. I told her that the silence was its own kind of answer and that next time she could ask. She said she would. We are both learning what that means. My father has said almost nothing about any of it, which is, in its own way, its own kind of answer about my father. Declan and I have spoken 4 times since the dinner. The conversations are shorter and more honest than anything we managed in 11 years of the old arrangement. There is a version of a real relationship somewhere on the other side of this, I think. I am not rushing toward it. I am letting it build at the pace of demonstrated change, which is the only pace that means anything. And me? I took the $60,000 I had been prepared to send him, and I put it into a renovation of my own kitchen, which I have been meaning to do for 3 years and kept deferring, because there was always somewhere else the money needed to go. The contractor finished last month. The counters are white oak, and the light over the island is exactly what I had drawn in the margin of a notebook in 2021, and then crossed out because it felt like too much to spend on myself. It is not too much, it is mine. If there is one thing I want you to take from this story, not the numbers, not the demand letter, not even my grandmother's flat hand on the table, it is this. The people who call you the responsible one are usually describing the mechanism by which they intend to remain irresponsible. They are nomming the arrangement, not the relationship. And the day you finally add the column, the full column, and read the total the way a stranger would read it, is the day you get to decide whether you are still comfortable with the terms. I was not comfortable. I just needed 11 years and a rehearsal dinner speech to figure that out. The spreadsheet is still open on my laptop. The total still says $247,000. Below it, in a new row I added last week, is the first $3,000 payment. It came in on the 1st of the month, quietly, automatically. Just like mine used to. That is my story. 11 years, one spreadsheet, one grandmother with a manila envelope, and the dinner table where a number too large to charm your way out of finally sat in the room and refused to leave. If this reached something real in you tonight, subscribe. I share stories like this every week about the people who finally read their own ledger and decided the balance was wrong. If you know someone who needs to hear this, send it to them. Not with a note. They'll know why. And leave me a comment. Tell me how long you held the column before you looked at the total. I'll read every single one.